Hello, Capricorn. I am Poetic Heretic, and this is your October 2019 astrology forecast. I'll be going over what I consider to be the most important astrological events of the month of October for Capricorn Sun, Rising, and Moon individuals out there, and giving you my interpretation of them. So, let us begin. Before we can properly understand the astrology of October, we must first go back to the end of September, specifically September 28th at 2:27 p.m. Eastern Time, where we had the new moon in Libra in your 10th house opposite Chiron. So a new moon is the beginning of the lunar cycle, which lasts about 28 days, and it influences that entire time period, that entire lunar cycle. Now, with this one beginning at the end of September, it influences almost all of October, specifically until October 27th when we have the next new moon. And so that is why this is so important. With this new moon occurring in your 10th house, it activated new beginnings surrounding your career, your work as well, perhaps just work in general, but especially career and like your relationship with society in a very broad and professional sense. And it's a great time for setting new goals for your career, for developing more self-discipline and self-mastery and that sort of thing. It's a time where you're likely to be very busy with your career, or if you don't have a career, you're unemployed or something like that, then I would say whatever is your main focus in life right now, whatever sort of would be your career if you had to have one. So again, that's September 28th. That's when the new moon was and is. The energy is building as we move through October, and we'll come back to this a bit later for some more information when we get to that point into the month. So going into October itself, on October 3rd at 4:14 a.m. Eastern Time, Mercury exits Libra and enters Scorpio, going from your 10th to your 11th house. So the first 2 months then of October, what we have is Mercury finishing up its transit through your 10th house, which is, again, your house of career. And so Mercury in your 10th house has your mind focused upon your career, has more communication often happening at work or with career matters, perhaps has you coming up with new ideas for career-related matters, but that is all finishing up in those first 2 days of the month. Mercury's been there for a number of weeks now, and then in the early hours of October 3rd, it shifts into your 11th house, and now your mind is suddenly very active indeed, but much more about the group, the community that you belong to, about group activities, about your circle of friends, perhaps, about your role in any kind of group that you belong to. It can also be a time where you come up with new and interesting and unique and unusual even ideas. And again, it's a rather intellectual transit for Mercury, which is already an intellectual planet. So that is in effect from October 3rd through the rest of the month. On October 4th at 12:21 a.m., in the very early minutes of October 4th, at least in Eastern Time, we have Mars entering Libra, going from your 9th to your 10th house. So this means that in the first 3 days of October, Mars is finishing up its transit through your 9th house, where it has been for quite a few weeks now. Mars in the 9th has you Feeling very enthusiastic has you prioritizing your beliefs and your ideals. It often is a time where your desire to travel is stimulated and perhaps expand your horizons and maybe take up new studies and stuff like that. A desire perhaps more for the spiritual aspects of life, even. Um, Again, it's all about the ninth house is all about beliefs and ideals and philosophy and spirituality and that sort of thing. And Mars is what we prioritize, Mars is what we fight for. And so you are prioritizing and fighting for your beliefs, your ideals, spirituality, etc., etc. However, once Mars moves into your 10th house on October 4th, now that prioritization is shifted again to your career, 10th house. And so you're likely to feel much more energized or motivated towards your career, towards your work. This is a time where you'll find yourself wanting to set new goals with your career. It's a time where you're likely to work that much harder in your career. And it's also a time where you may find yourself becoming, or at least wanting to become, self-employed or starting your own business or that sort of thing. So very energetic, hardworking placement for Mars, or transit for Mars, we should say. And again, that's from October 4th through the rest of the month. On October 8th at 1:05 p.m., Venus enters Scorpio, going from your 10th to your 11th house. So for the first 7.5 days of October, Venus continues transiting your 10th house, yet again, of career. And with Venus transit through your 10th house, the planet of love, the planet of harmony and socialization, and also the planet of luxury and money, we're looking at your, how do I say this? Feeling more attracted to the idea of work, being perhaps more sociable at work, having more social experiences, blending with your work/career life. You may even meet someone interesting during this time. And if it's someone of a romantic disposition, then it's likely to be through your work or connected to your work in some way. Or if you already have a partner, then this person may perhaps indirectly stimulate or contribute to your career at this time in some way. So very well, Venus basically blesses anything it touches. That is what they say. And so this is a very good time for your career, I would say. But that is indeed only for the first 7.5 days of this month on October 8th, when Venus enters your 11th house. Now the shift is much more to a love and enjoyment of, again, with this 11th house stuff, the group, the community, perhaps your role in the group. It's a very friendly placement for Venus. Now it's like Venus wants to be very friendly with the group and socialize much more with the group and that sort of thing. And similar to Venus in the 10th, how you might meet someone connected to your job or career, when Venus is in your 11th, now you may meet someone connected to a group that you belong to. And if you do, particularly if it's a romantic relationship, it's likely to be one of a more intellectual nature, quite possibly, and perhaps less intimate and less emotional. So that can be a bit of a downside, but the upside is that it's one where perhaps you will find yourself feeling much more almost like best friends, or having great camaraderie with this person, you could say. So And now, obviously, that's going to vary from person to person because this is a general reading, and we would have to look at your specific chart to get a much better idea of how that's likely to manifest in your life at this time. But generally speaking, that's what we have. Perhaps for some of you, you'll meet someone absolutely delightful during this Venus transit through your 11th house, and others, you may meet someone like that, but then they turn out to just be a friend. I mean, there's a number of possibilities within that general range. And that Venus in the 11th activity is from October 8th onward for the rest of the month. On October 11th, Mercury enters its retrograde shadow in Scorpio. That is in your 11th house. So I'll try to explain this very briefly. What do I mean by Mercury entering its retrograde shadow? Well, when Mercury goes retrograde, it happens in the form of basically like a pendulum swing. So imagine my finger as Mercury going along in the sky and just traveling along, and then it goes for the first pendulum swing. That's the first time it enters its shadow. Then it actually goes retrograde, which is the swing backwards. And it goes direct, and that's the second time it enters its shadow. And then it continues on in the sky. So Mercury entering its shadow, its retrograde shadow on October 11th, that is when it first enters the pendulum swing. That is the first pendulum swing. And what this means, very simply put, is that it will be to already feel like Mercury is retrograde. Now, some people think Mercury retrograde is like the end of the world. Other people think it's not that bad if you are respectful of it, or just try to be extra careful. I tend to take a middle of the road approach, saying that, well, while I don't think it's the end of the world, I certainly think that it should be honored whenever possible, meaning that I do think that you should avoid starting new things during a Mercury retrograde if possible. If it's not possible or extremely inconvenient, then whatever, do what you got to do, but avoid it if possible. And you should be careful about how you communicate things during a Mercury retrograde because miscommunications are more likely. And you should be more careful with electronic devices and technology in general because malfunctions with those are indeed very often more likely during a Mercury retrograde. And you should be careful about traveling and try to maybe avoid traveling, or at least be more careful with traveling during a Mercury retrograde because there are issues. There are often issues with traveling during a Mercury retrograde because Mercury is all about travel. Now, does that mean you shouldn't travel at all? No, of course not. But certainly if you're going to, be extra careful during it. I find, generally speaking, this is just my experience, do what you want, but generally speaking, in my experience, I find that when I honor the cosmos, when I honor the energy of the universe, things just plain tend to go better. So that's what I do. But you do what you want. On October 13th at 5:07 p.m., we have the full moon in Aries. That is in your 4th house. But before we talk about that specifically, recall what I said earlier about the new moon in your 10th house. Well, the full moon is where things come to a head. It is where that lunar cycle energy peaks. It is where things tend to happen. It is where the action very often is. So the fact that the new moon was in your 10th house of career means that now that career or new moon in 10th house of career energy is peaking at this time of the full moon on October 13th. So you can expect things to really happen on or around October 13th involving your career, your goals, your work, your main focus in life, your career aspirations, even that sort of thing. Now, in addition to that, as I said, the full moon itself is taking place in your 4th house of your home, your family, your immediate environment, your safety and security, your roots, your ancestry. So you can expect things regarding those subjects to come to a head also at that time of the full moon on October 13th. So family things above all else, I would say, with 4th house activity. And perhaps also, I would say perhaps also this is kind of calling more on my intuition here, but the idea of safety and security being emphasized as well. Perhaps more so because you are Capricorn, and Capricorn cares about that more so than a lot of other signs as it is. So that would be my theory. There's also even emotional issues as well, I should mention. Fourth house has a connection with sort of the depths of emotion. So that's another possibility. But I would say family things and things involving like your home above all else to be likely. And then below that, safety and security. And then below that, everything else I mentioned as far as your fourth house is concerned. And then that's in addition to all the 10th house of career stuff that I mentioned. So I hope that made sense. On October 23rd at 1:19 p.m., the sun enters Scorpio, as it does every time around this time of year, thus going from your 10th to your 11th house. So, as you can tell by now, it's quite the theme in this video of things going from your 10th to your 11th house. And so really this is just continuing this theme here. But to be more specific about it, the sun is the giver of life. It is our conscious awareness. It is our sense of self. It is our life force. It vivifies and brings to life everything it touches. It brings great energy to everything that it touches. So while it is transiting your 10th house up until October 23rd, you can essentially expect even more reason, or there's even more reason to expect this emphasis on your career, your goals, your main focus in life, that sort of thing, to be given great energy and also to be very much within your conscious awareness, far more than usual. It's a time, I would say, especially with all the other 10th house activity, like earlier in the month, it's a time where like you're really wanting to figure out your career if you don't have it figured out, or if you do have it figured out, like set new goals with it, especially soon after the new moon on September 28th or very early in October, I would say, and become more self-disciplined and that sort of thing. Like that's another way to honor the cosmos, I would say, is when, you know, it's like they say, strike while the iron is hot. When the iron is hot in terms of your career, as it is for much of this month, especially early on in the month, but then, well, Mars enters your 10th on October 4th and stays there for the rest of the month. So pretty much the whole month in general. Then you want to honor that by focusing on your career and your main focus more if possible, you know, perhaps becoming more disciplined about it, developing more self-mastery regarding it, that sort of thing. But on October 23rd, when the sun then enters your 11th house, now what is given more life and more of your conscious awareness and more energy and more focus is yet again the group, the community, any group to which you belong, your sort of wider circle of friends, networking as well. A very good word for the 11th house, networking. And so, you know, without going deep into that, it's not really necessary at this point because we've already sort of been over the same sort of theme this month, many things going from your 10th to your 11th house. So you get the idea, you know, as we get to more later in the month, although we also see some of it earlier in the month, your 11th house of networking and the group, the community, your role within that, all of that becomes much more emphasized and becomes a much bigger player in your life at this time. Speaking of which, on October 27th, we have the new moon in Scorpio at 11:38 p.m., and that is in your, yet again, 11th house, and it is opposite Uranus. So, new moon in your 11th house. Now you can expect new beginnings, around the group to which you belong, community, friends, networking, all of that stuff. And that will, of course, last indeed through the rest of October and well into the next month of November. And of course, yes, indeed, it is opposite Uranus. And so that's what makes this new moon particularly so interesting. And also, I think I forgot to mention earlier, I apologize, the previous new moon on September 28th being opposite Chiron, we can all expect this idea of the healing of wounds, with wounded healer Chiron being in the mix, to be a big part of this current lunar cycle from September 28th through October 27th. This idea of healing wounds either in ourselves or in others, or healing the wounds in others that are a match to the ones within ourselves in an attempt to heal those same wounds within ourselves. Did you follow all of that? Because that's kind of Chiron oversimplified. That energy is in the current lunar cycle. Again, I apologize for not mentioning that earlier. I'm pretty sure I didn't. I don't know where my mind was. Geez, Mercury's not even retrograde yet, but things happen like that sometimes, I suppose. Anyway, back to the new moon on October 27th, however. With this new moon on October 27th being opposite Uranus, sudden, shocking, unexpected Uranus, the planet of sudden insights and sudden revelations, the planet of genius, the weird planet, the odd planet, the unique planet, the planets representing times where things are so confusing and crazy and don't make any sense, and you're just kind of suddenly there, like things just suddenly are crazy and don't make sense. That's Uranus. Uranus is the reconciler of irreconcilable opposites. It breaks things down that aren't working so that new things can take their place that then can work. Now, with this new moon being opposite Uranus, you can expect all of that kind of energy to be infused not only into this new moon, but into the entire next lunar cycle. So what I'm thinking with this new moon in particular is that it's likely to come in like a bolt of lightning. Uranus, in fact, is the bolt of lightning. It is the sudden flash of lightning. And that sort of erratic Uranian energy that is seeking freedom and breaking down of old structures that aren't working is very likely to be a part of this entire next lunar cycle. And that applies to everyone, by the way, everyone of every sign. Another theory I have is that it may very well be that some sudden, shocking, unexpected Uranian event takes place at the time of the new moon, and then that somehow facilitates or triggers the new beginnings that make up the new moon, or that sort of represent this next lunar cycle. And again, for you specifically, Capricorn, it is in your 11th house of networking, the group, the community, etc., etc. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out on October 27th. You can expect the unexpected that day. That's for damn sure. On October 30th at 6:04 p.m., we have a Mercury-Venus conjunction in Scorpio, and that is in your 11th house. So when these two get together, Mercury, the planet of the mind, and Venus, the planet of love and harmony, the way it tends to manifest is it's like, oh, let's talk about things, let's work things out, let's find harmony, let's communicate really well so that we can get along again and figure things out, work things out. Let's come to an intellectual understanding of things so that we can then achieve and have harmony again. Let's be diplomatic. Let's find a way to get along on something that maybe we haven't been getting along with or on. So you can expect that kind of energy. And yet again, it's in your 11th house. So for you specifically, Capricorn, it is very likely to have undertones of, yet again, the group to which you belong, your community, networking, your wider circle of friends, that sort of thing. So should be a good time overall, I would say. Not a bad area of life to have a Mercury Venus conjunction. It's like, oh, now everyone's far more likely to get along in a group setting, which sometimes that can be challenging because in a group there's so many different people, so many different perspectives on things, and there are conflicts and that sort of thing. Well, with Mercury Venus getting together on October 30th, there should be much more like diplomacy and understanding and communication and that sort of stuff. However, another theory that I have with the Mercury Venus conjunction, and this is sort of my going out on a limb, but it may happen. It appeared to happen to me personally just recently when we had another Mercury Venus conjunction not long before I filmed this, is that there may be perhaps even some kind of a breakthrough at that time. Conjunctions are very powerful, keep in mind. I consider them the most powerful aspect in astrology. I don't know how many other astrologers do, to be honest, but I know at least some do. Probably many do, because conjunctions really are when things tend to happen. So what I'm thinking is, indeed, with Mercury actually being connected to the planet Uranus that I was just talking about, the sudden, shocking, unexpected Uranus, and Uranus also being about breakthroughs, I think that the Mercury-Venus conjunction can sometimes manifest as a breakthrough in the area of life regarding technology, which would be Mercury, and the things that we like, things that we want, Venus. And so it may even be that on October 30th, many of us are going to suddenly get something that we want, perhaps in the area of technology or communication or something of an intellectual nature. Those are all Mercury things that I just mentioned. And then Venus is what we want, what we want, what we like, what we enjoy, what we love, that sort of thing. So very interesting stuff indeed. I know that I personally am very much looking forward to that Mercury-Venus conjunction on October 30th. On October 31st at 11:41 a.m., Halloween Day, we have Mercury stationing retrograde in Scorpio, and that is your 11th house. So this is the last piece of information I have for you, Capricorn, but basically it's just talking about more of what I already mentioned earlier when I talked about Mercury entering its retrograde shadow. Well, this is when Mercury reaches the end of that first pendulum swing and begins to experience or go on the second swing that goes backwards. This is when the retrograde officially begins. And if you haven't felt the retrograde up until this point, it's far more likely that you will now. One thing I forgot to mention earlier, when a planet goes retrograde, you can think of it as the signal of that planet also getting turned up, amplified in whatever area it is in. Now, again, for you, Capricorn, it is in your 11th house of networking, the group, the community, your wider group of friends, that sort of thing. So you can expect all of that intellectual focus and intellectual awareness and communication with the group and networking and all that to be amplified even more at this time. First, I would say when Mercury enters its retrograde shadow on October 11th, and then again, yet even more, when Mercury actually stations retrograde on October 31st, Halloween. So should be quite the interesting Halloween, literally having Mercury go retrograde on that exact date. You know, maybe it'll be an extra, like, sort of spooky, otherworldly Halloween. I don't know. Mercury retrograde certainly can confuse things a bit, and confusion is tied to all of that sort of spooky, nebulous stuff. So who knows? Time will tell. But that is the energy that we can be aware of for sure. And that is basically all I have for you this month, Capricorn. So I hope you enjoyed. I hope you have a magnificent month of October. Happy Halloween. And if you enjoyed this video, feel free to subscribe if you're not already, as I do indeed plan on returning very soon with more astrology and tarot related content, including astrology and tarot forecasts, more forecasts for all signs. So thanks again. I again hope you have a great month, and I hope to see you next time. Bye for now.